Greetings, I'm John Peterson with the USA Schools. Today is February 26th, 2013. It's the 30th of 38 days. My guest today is Representative Mark Mickelson, and Mark is new in the legislature, and so thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us about legislation.
You're welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Mark, let's start out. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the area you represent in Sioux Falls.
Every district has about 23,000 people in it. My district is 5 miles long and 2 miles wide, and it's south central Sioux Falls. It runs from downtown to the south end of town, 85th Street, between Cliff Avenue and Western, basically.
Sounds like a big ranch in West River.
Or a small ranch in West River.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, you're in appropriations, and the one thing that I've learned from roaming the halls here for the past few years is that probably one of the most demanding committees would have to be appropriations. You're new to the legislature. I'm just curious. Did you choose to go in there, or were you encouraged to go into appropriations?
Well, believe it or not, I asked.
Okay.
My business background is finance.
Okay.
That's what I do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be a big believer that we talk a lot about different matters, and we'll debate them. But if there's not a lot of money attached to them,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how much policy that we're always setting when we do that. I think where the state chooses to spend its money is very reflective of the policy that the state's setting, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so we roll over $1 billion in the Department of Social Services spending every year. And we probably don't talk about all the programs inside that department every year like we did initially. And so I'm enthused to be on the appropriations. I'm a big believer that you get out of things what you put into them, and so I'm happy to put in the work. It's been productive work. I've gotten a good grounding in the funding of state government and where, at least where we spend our money. So I'm glad to be on it, and it is something I requested.
Okay, all right, good. I've got to ask you this, because a lot of times when a person is new to a job, we ask them, any surprises? Has there been anything that you weren't aware of in appropriations that has been new to you?
Oh, we put off the hard issues until late in the session, and so that's typical of people respond to deadlines. Mm-hmm. And the best thing about a 9-week session is that we got to make a decision within 9 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It's too bad, the U.S. Congress doesn't have a deadline to deal with some of the decisions that they have to make. So I would say my biggest surprise in business, you kind of, different people do business different ways, but, you do business kind of cards face up, and you make a deal, you shake hands, and you move on. And so this environment, this year, for me, has not, people are very cautious in dealing in that manner. And that's maybe something I should have expected but did not. That's different. And that's probably one of my biggest surprises.
Okay. Mark, Senate Bill 28 is the funding bill for schools, I believe, is the number. And it's my understanding that we're going to get approximately 3%. And I need to start out and say we're appreciative of that. We wish there was more ongoing money. I think we're always lobbying for ongoing money so that our schools can predict what they're going to have for 2-3 years down the road instead of just doing a daily or a yearly budget. And so back to the 3%, we're appreciative. Now with that, we understand that there might possibly be some one-time money for schools. Do you anticipate that, some one-time money coming out?
I guess I would be surprised if there isn't. The governor has announced he left $26 million in money, one-time money, in the fiscal 13 and the fiscal 14 budget. The House Republican caucus meets, and I'm sure the House Democrat caucus meets, and decides where their priorities are and how we want to spend that money. And certainly education's part of that conversation. That those kinds of decisions are, probably doesn't surprise you, beyond the pay grade, of a freshman legislator sitting on appropriations. But I think it's fair to say, there'll be some. I would expect there would be some one-time money. And I think, what you guys need, what education needs to realize is we had a bill to raise taxes, and the voters didn't want to raise taxes. And every time we spend another dollar on social services, it takes a dollar away from another priority, okay? And so that state budget is reflective of our values as a state and where we want to spend our monies and what our priorities are. And so there's nothing wrong with kind of having some of those hard conversations and say, hey, are we just going to go up and split the one-time money away, 3 ways to the 3 highest priorities, or are we going to make some fundamental decisions? We are swimming upstream, okay, with respect to the prosperity of our state. And the prosperity of our state has meant that the federal government is funding a lower percentage of our Medicaid cost. Fiscal 14 budget, that's $16 million. That's $16 million that couldn't go to education, okay? And so there's just some of those kinds of things going on that folks need to understand. At the same time, revenue's been decent. They're not projecting it to be beyond their initial projection, but the initial projection had 5-6% revenue growth in it. And it's good because even within K through 12 education, enrollment grew a percent or 2, 1.5%, and 3%. So if you grow enrollment 3%, and if you grow enrollment up 1.5%, you grow costs 3%, you're at your 4.5%. And if your revenue is growing 4.5%, that's kind of about how much there is to go around.
Also part of Senate Bill 28, and I was not in appropriations yesterday, but Mitch Richter was, the other gentleman that works with the USA schools, and he said that there was some discussion, and you were an active part of it in regards to the levies.
Sure.
Where we're at. I believe roughly we're at ag's going to go down about 25 cents. That we're going to have owner occupied is going to go up about 25 cents, and commercial is going to go up about 55 cents. Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, as a freshman legislator walking into a vote, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel fair. If you put that in percentage terms, the local match, the local property tax match to fund the general fund for education, the legislature controls that. Most people out there have no clue that's how that works. The legislature sets the mill levies. We're raising taxes $13.5 million on the local property tax bill.
Yeah.
Okay, to fund education. Okay, those numbers that you threw out, it's $6 million on owner occupied. That's a 6% tax increase. Okay, on flat valuations. Yeah. Okay, the commercial is going up $8 million. That's a 6% increase on flat valuations, and the ag community is basically flat on about $2.5 billion increase in valuation. So I think folks don't have to think very hard, and they'll say, well, that's not right or fair or equitable, and the agricultural community realizes that.
Yeah.
This is the result of some formulas that were put in place years ago, and so the ag community has said, we're going to fix it. Okay, but we need to go through a process. We need to educate the ag community. We realize that there's an issue there, and we need to address it. So I don't think we're going to make any big waves this session because we're down to the last 5 or 6 days. But next year, I would expect the result to be different with respect to how those mill levies play out.
Okay, Mark. I could ask you questions for 30 minutes, but I think I told you before we started that if we go over 10, sometimes we lose the attention of some of our members, and so I'm going to speed this thing up. ESL, that bill I believe was 159. What are your thoughts on the ESL bill, because that would impact Sioux Falls?
Oh, it's great for...
And the rest of the state.
Yeah, there are 77 school districts that have kids that are eligible under the ESL program today.
Yes.
And today, the funding formula recognizes that special ed kids get a higher allocation, and the small schools get a higher allocation. That bill would say English as a second language learners get a special allocation also. The bill went through the Senate. They stripped the money out of it so we can see how much money we have at the end of the year.
Yeah.
It's in House Education Committee tomorrow. I'm hopeful it'll get through there.
Yeah.
And it'll be part of the conversation about dollars at the last day or two of session. Hopefully we can fund it.
I've got to ask you about this one, the Sentinel bill, guns in the school. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, that was a tough bill. I ended up voting for it because I felt like it's not something that would ever be appropriate for my school district, where my kids go to school, Robert Frost and Patrick Henry in Sioux Falls, but that possibly in Faith, South Dakota, maybe it would make sense.
Yeah.
There's a police officer at Patrick Henry, there's a police officer at Lincoln High School. You go to a Lincoln High School basketball game, there's two armed police officers there.
Yeah.
That bill requires anyone that would be considered a volunteer to go to weapons handling training, the same as a police officer. And important to me, the school board would elect into it, and I know you guys have all heard that argument, that there would be a local control decision, but important to me, the chief of police, who's the same person that puts the police officers in the schools in my school district, would approve the plan. So I don't think anyone's going to implement a school sentinel plan, or not very many school districts are going to. It was a hard vote, and I would encourage anyone that's still watching this to say, watch what we do with money, because that's probably more reflective of our priorities than something like a litmus test issue like the school sentinel bill.
Mark, the last thing, we're running out of time, but I know it's important to you, workforce development. What can you tell us about workforce development?
Well, that's probably the number one impact on economic development is what skills do your workers have, and can they be used here? In my school district, Southeast Technical Institute, 94% of those kids get a job in their field within 60 miles of where they go to school. Okay? And you're adding value, computer degrees, computer drafting degrees, a lot of health-related degrees. So these are, instead of someone getting out of school making $10 an hour, they get a skill and they go make $16 or $18 an hour. So hopefully you'll see us doing something good in the technical school arena in terms of funding and expansion opportunities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.